Hello, my name is Carl with a K as I say. I am a retired academic librarian in Rochester, New York. I am recording this in the summer of 2012. I want to give a brief overview of my bout with ulcerative colitis and my ileostomy. It all began more than half my lifetime ago now, in the early 1970s. I was about 30. Some of it is rather forgotten, but some of it is still very clear in my mind. Anyway, I developed IBS, Irritable Bowel Syndrome, and took medication for it. But over a few years it got worse. I worked the morning of December 31st, 1974, and went home sick. Little did I ever dream what the next month would bring. As the days went on, I became sicker as I lay in bed with frequent trips to the bathroom. I ran out of food and needed laundry done, so I called my parents, who lived 75 miles away. They came and got me squared away. A few days later, they came again and took me to my new GI doctor. I can't remember what all he said and did, but I was given another appointment a week later. They then took me to their home, where I continued my downward slide. On Wednesday, January 15th, we came back to Rochester for the appointment. I was in pretty bad shape, and that was very quickly realized. A biopsy was immediately done. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and admitted through emergency to the hospital. Other than having my tonsils out when I was 5, being in the hospital was a new experience for me. A catheter was put in, no problem. An IV was put in. That freaked me out, but the doctor patiently explained that it was, as I very well now know, a very routine procedure. And an NG, a nasogastric tube, was put in. A young woman was assisting with the procedure for her very first time. She was so excited about it that, sick as I was, I felt I was helping someone. They were taking me for x-rays twice a day. I was so weak that they would try to move me from the gurney to the x-ray table on the sheets I was lying on. At that time, I was closing on buying my home. Being in the hospital complicated things, but either Thursday or Friday afternoon, I don't remember which, my father came into the hospital room, and as I lay there, he held the keys up to me and said, "You now own your house." I remember thinking, why did I go through with this? Because if I don't make it, they would just have to turn around and sell it. But then I thought, that won't be my problem, so I stopped worrying. By then I had toxic megacolon. Friday evening, a surgeon came in and explained what surgery they might have to do. That night, a nurse sat with me for a long time and we talked about life and its challenges. I have always been grateful for her concern and for that comfort. Later, another nurse told me I was irrational during some of the night. The next day, when I was having x-rays, I suddenly had terrific pain. I think that is when my intestine perforated. I was taken back to my room and early in the afternoon taken to the operating room. I didn't realize that after surgery I'd go to a different room, so when a nurse came in to say goodbye to me, I concluded that she had decided that it was terminal. That day was January 18th, the anniversary of the deaths of both my grandfathers. One had died before I was born, and the other when I was 14. I knew it might also be my death date. But going into surgery I was pretty calm because I knew that the unbelievable experience I'd been living would soon be over. I would either die or be completely cured by surgery. Either outcome was acceptable to me at that point. And obviously the surgery was successful. I had a Brooke ileostomy. When I woke up, I was in a hospital ward with 3 other men in the 1920s area of the medical center. My father was there. I don't know to this day how many hours I'd been in surgery or in recovery. He seemed very surprised that I was so lucid. The next day was Sunday. No one came to visit me. It was one of the loneliest days of my life. None of my friends knew I was in the hospital, and my parents, knowing I was in good hands, had not made the trip that winter day. Telephones were not so easy to come by then. I think there was only one pay phone for patients on the floor, and certainly there were no phones in the room. I remember the surgeon came in and was very upset with my 4 days' growth of beard and said, I want that man shaved. Of course, I didn't have a razor with me, but another patient in the ward had an electric razor which he lent, and a nurse shaved me. The surgeon was also very upset that I didn't have elastic stockings on to prevent blood clots, so they were very quickly gotten and put on me. I remained in the hospital until January 31st. One day they brought scales in to weigh another man in the ward. I said, I'd like to be weighed. The nurse said, you're up and around now, so next time you're by the nurse's station, just ask them to weigh you. So I did. I weighed 110 pounds. Although I'm thin, I had never weighed that little in my adult life. I was very upset because it was always hard for me to put on weight. Later, a nurse came in when I was back in bed and said not to worry, I would soon gain weight. And she was right. A month later, I weighed 125 pounds, which is more than I even weigh now. I went to my parents' home on January 31st. I was so very weak, and recovery seemed so slow. At first, it hurt even to try to stand up straight, but I gradually regained some strength. I came back to Rochester in my new home in the middle of March and went back to work very part-time. I still got very tired. I remember thinking that I would never be able to work full-time again, but by the middle of May I was back full-time. The rectum was still in, and early in January 1976 I saw the GI specialist. He checked on it and said it was diseased and should eventually come out. Several weeks later I saw the surgeon. I asked him why it hadn't been taken out with the other surgery. He was absolutely incredulous that I would ask, and said that I'd been so very ill that they had just done what had to be done quickly on an emergency basis. He said he would take it out in a few years. I'm not the bravest guy around and knew that I couldn't live with that hanging over me. So I said I would like it out sooner. He said, okay, how about later this year? I said, sooner. He said, this summer? I said, I have friends getting married in May. I want it out and I want to be fully recovered by then. He said he could work it in about 10 days. Is that what I wanted? At that point, my courage failed me. But he said, I think you do. My administrative assistant will schedule it and call you this afternoon. And so it came out early in February. I was in the hospital 10 days then, back to work part-time in about a month, and full-time several weeks later. That surgery leaves a cavity that needs to heal from the inside out, and it didn't completely heal until the end of July. So now I've had a Brooke ileostomy for almost 40 years. The procedure had only been perfected about 20 years before, in the early 1950s. And since then, another procedure, the Coke pouch, and its variation, the BCIR, the Barnett Continent Intestinal Reservoir, has come and somewhat gone, and yet another procedure, the J-pouch, is now a standard procedure. I've had a few problems over the years, the worst being an adhesion, which I first thought was food poisoning about 10 years ago. After 3 days of being sick, I admitted myself to the hospital at 5 a.m. When it did not relax itself after a few days, I had surgery and was in the hospital 12 days total. By then my father had passed away and mother was 90 and living in a retirement home. I had asked that she not be told that I was in the hospital, so when I called her after the surgery, and I may still even have the NG tube in, I don't remember, the first thing she said on hearing my raspy voice was, "My, you have a terrible cold." The 3 incisions have all been up and down. The first 2 were sewn up. The third, which was about 8 inches, was stapled with 25 staples. It was fun watching them being taken out. I don't really have any food restrictions, except that I avoid a lot of high-fiber food at a meal. Once I overdid when I was visiting a small city and staying in a hotel. I remember lying on the bed at midnight wondering what the emergency department and their small local hospital would be like, but fortunately it cleared itself in an hour or 2. A few years ago I was taking baby aspirin for heart health. I developed internal bleeding which they wanted to check out. At first I had a camera down my throat, but that showed no problem. So a few weeks later I had a camera through the stoma. I wrote out detailed instructions on how to put an appliance back on and told them that after I was out, they were on their own. Fortunately, one of the nurses had worked with ostomy patients, and she reassured me that she understood everything, and she did. When I woke up from the procedure, the new appliance was on perfectly. And of course I was taken off the aspirin, and eventually the bleeding stopped. And once I had a slight infection very near the stoma. That, when it healed, left the skin uneven. It was hard to get a good seal for the appliance, and thus I had some leaks. This, of course, was very discouraging. I discussed it with my regular doctor, and she suggested seeing a plastic surgeon. Since that seemed rather drastic, I then discussed it with an ostomy nurse. She suggested a filler paste, which has worked wonderfully, and I don't think I've had a seal fail for several years. I hate to hear or see the word bag used. I call it an appliance, or when I want to sound more medical, an ileostomy appliance or a stoma drainage appliance. When I worked, I emptied the appliance on a pretty set schedule, usually 8 or more times a day. Now that I'm retired, I empty it about that often, but not on such a rigid schedule. The one thing I really dislike is when it's a very liquid discharge, because then I can feel it sloshing around when I walk. And as I empty it several times during the night, I rarely sleep more than 3 hours at a time. But fortunately, I usually get back to sleep quickly. I change the appliance every 4th morning. It takes about 20 to 25 minutes to carefully take off the old one, prepare the area, put the new one on, and then put things away. Once in a while when I'm doing it, I stop to think what a miracle of surgical skills and medical devices it really all is. For without it, I would have been gone at the age of 32. I know my closest friends know I have it, but others probably don't. It doesn't really show in any way. In my retirement, I've gone to wearing suspenders because being so tall and thin, I sometimes have problems getting pants with a long rise so that the belt is above the stoma. I think suspenders look silly, so even in the summer I usually wear a light sleeveless sweater to hide them. So here I am in 2012. I am forever grateful for all the family members, friends, and medical staff who have helped me with this journey. It is a major decision to have surgery, and in a way I was fortunate that I did not have to make it. It was made for me when my intestine perforated. I have watched the various discussions of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease on YouTube. My heart goes out to anyone, especially young people, suffering from these physically and emotionally devastating conditions. Their sheer courage moves me. I hope medicine continues to advance and eventually conquer these horrible diseases. Then such drastic surgery would no longer be needed. I have seen many medical advances in my lifetime. Maybe I will live to see this one. Thank you.